Hi, folks. It's Jeff Saks again with our 100 Objects in the History of Halacha series, each week looking at a different piece of material, material artifact from the Jewish people, and how we go about doing mitzvot. This week I wanted to look at KOS SHEL BERACHAH. I may have mistakenly referred to it in an earlier email. Hold on. I may have mistakenly referred to it in an earlier email as a Kiddush Cup, and surely we habitually refer to this object you see on the screen here in a rather modern iteration, or perhaps in a more conventional, traditional image of a Kiddush. We refer to it as a Kiddush Cup because in most cases it's being used for the mitzvah of Kiddush on Shabbat or on Yom Tov. But of course that is not its only use, and technically it is what's referred to in Halacha as a KOS SHEL BERACHAH, a cup for the reciting of ritual blessings, because as you know, Chazal determined that for a variety of things, again, most commonly Kiddush, certain berachot must be recited while holding a cup of wine or grape juice. And that cup is called the KOS SHEL BERACHAH. And all of the dinim of the Kiddush Cup apply equally to any time we need to take a KOS SHEL BERACHAH, whether you're standing under the chuppah, reciting the birkot, erusin, v'nisuin, and wedding, whether you are officiating at a pidyon haben, whether it's for birkat hamazon. Can people hear me? Okay. Benj Pash, if you have any trouble, contact our tech support. Ezra, if you're on, please be in touch with. Okay, I got it. Please be in touch with Benj Pash. So for any purpose that you're taking a KOS, all of the halachot apply equally to the Kiddush Cup, but colloquially we do refer to it as a Kiddush Cup. Now, of course, the image you see on the screen is kind of, taking Kiddush Cup. You call up Central Casting and you say, send me a Kiddush Cup. That's what you're going to get. I just pulled a sample out of the cabinet. Here's a kind of conventional style Kiddush Cup on a leg like this. This actually is the Kiddush Cup that I generally use, which is, I hope you can see it. Let me hold it up against something white so you can see it a little better. It has a curious history. My wife and I, shortly after we got married, were in a rather swanky Manhattan gift shop, not a Jewish store, not a Judaica store, but a rather swanky gift shop, and it had this very interesting cup. Let me show you. The base has a kind of abstract shape. It's not perfectly round. It looks more like almost like a puddle, an oddly shaped, misshaped thing. The Kiddush Cup itself is, conical. It has these little decorative indentations on it, and it was obvious to me that it was a kind of modernistic Kiddush Cup, but I couldn't understand what it was doing in a store that had no other Jewish items or identity. And the saleswoman explained to us that it's not a Kiddush Cup. It's a silver cup, but it's sold as a vase, like at a fancy dinner setting. In front of your 17-piece dinner setting, you would have this little silver vase with fresh cut flowers on the table. It was so obvious to me that it could be repurposed as a Kiddush Cup that we bought it, and I've been using it. It's been my Kiddush Cup of choice ever since. but that is, of course, rather unusual. But the volume, it's not an egg cup. It wouldn't be appropriate for an egg cup. It's quite large. It's larger than I would say larger than the average Kiddush cup, and it certainly fulfills even the Chazon Ish shiur, which we're going to talk about momentarily. I'm not discussing tonight the laws of Kiddush, which have been covered in various WebYeshiva shiurim, but I'm talking about the laws of the cup itself. A KOS SHEL BERACHAH has to hold a revi'it. Revi'it is a halachic measure about which there is debate. I'm not going to cover the history of this debate, of how we measure what this measure of volume is. But, oh, there's a typo there. Sorry, I have to proofread this better. There was a typo last week also. The mainstream position is that of Rav Moshe Feinstein. There's a typo here. It says Feinstein. It should be Feinstein. That for most mitzvot, 3.3 ounces is sufficient. Because in almost every case, whenever one is required to take a cup and say a blessing over it, Kiddush, Havdalah, the other examples that I gave, Birkat Hamazon, I started mentioning that there is a din, perhaps we can talk about it on another occasion, that when one benches with a zimun, when you have more than 3 men together reciting the grace after meals, that the mizamein should say the Birkat Hamazon, the grace after meals, while holding a cup of wine, and at the end should say Borei Pri Hagafen and drink the wine. That is not done normally on a day-to-day basis, but in certain places people are careful to do this on Shabbatot and or at other festive mitzvah meals. But in most cases, when we take a cup of wine, it's for rabbinic purposes. And Rav Moshe says that 3.3 ounces, which is quite small, you would be hard-pressed to find a Kiddush cup on the market that's less than 3.3 ounces. In theory, you could find a little shot glass that wouldn't hold that amount. For certain things, min ha-Torah, for Torah obligations, Rav Moshe suggests the larger shiur of 4.4 ounces. That, in theory, is Kiddush on Friday night. Reciting Kiddush on Friday night, that set text of Kiddush on Friday night, while holding a cup of wine, is a rabbinic obligation. But it is a rabbinic obligation through which we fulfill a Torah obligation, the Torah obligation of Zachor et Yom HaShabbat L'Kadsho, to remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy, or to sanctify it through verbally remembering it, declaring it to be a holy day. One is not required, min ha-Torah, biblically, to do that while holding a cup of wine. But since rabbinically the method by which we fulfill the biblical obligation is to hold a cup of wine, so Rav Moshe Feinstein suggests perhaps a larger shiur, 4.4 ounces, but again, most conventional Kiddush cups are at least that large. There is a more lenient position, that of Rav Avram Chaim Noeh, who was the Rav in Yerushalayim a couple of generations ago, and he had a smaller measurement, which was a little bit less than 3 ounces. And, of course, famously, the Chazon Ish of Bnei Brak, who was an important posek, one of the founders of modern Haredi Judaism, ultra-Orthodox Judaism in Eretz Yisrael up until the 1950s. He had a larger shiur of a little more than 5 ounces. But for our purposes, in almost all cases, 3.3 or 4.4 ounces is the measure of a revi'it for Kiddush. Now, I'm not going to talk about it because, like I said, we're talking about the cup and not its contents technically. You know that some people have a custom of saying Kiddush on Shabbos morning over schnapps, over liquor, over whiskey, and not over grape juice. This is something which, according to technically the letter of the law, is not completely proper, but according to widespread custom is certainly accepted. Technically speaking, if wine is available, wine is always preferable. However, it's a very widespread custom, which may have something to do with the fact that wine, kosher wine that is, was very expensive and hard to come by throughout parts of Europe, throughout large swaths of history, that we were lenient and we made Kiddush over other beverages as well. And people that have that custom certainly have what to rely on. However, according to most opinions, not all opinions, but according to the majority of opinions, if one makes Kiddush on Shabbos morning on whiskey, he or she should do so over a revi'it of whiskey, which is much larger than the average little shot glass. I'm not such an expert on these things. Perhaps people can tell me technically, or I'm sure if you Google it, how many ounces there are in a shot. I suspect that it is significantly smaller than the required. How many ounces in a shot? Sorry, I should have checked this before. So technically speaking, if one wants to make Kiddush over whiskey, he should do so holding a Kiddush cup full of whiskey and not just one of those little jiggers, one of those little shot glasses. Sometimes those shot glasses themselves are even smaller than a shot. A shot is 1.5 ounces. Yeah, I'm sorry. Someone keeps complaining about the beeping. I'm sorry. It's a feature of the system. When people chat in, it beeps so that I can hear it. I'm sorry about that. I hope it won't literally kill you. So that is the din of a revi'it. I'll try to lower the volume of the beeping. Okay. Here's another din. Interestingly, we learn something about the laws of Kiddush from Paro in Mitzrayim. The Sarah Mashkim, in telling the butler, in telling his dream to Joseph while they're in the pit, while they're in the jail, tells the dream to Joseph, Vayomer lo b'chalamo v'hinei gefen lefonai. V'kos paro biyadi, v'ekach et ha'anavim, v'eschat otam el kos paro, v'eten et hakos al kaf paro. The butler, the Sarah Mashkim, the wine steward, is describing how he would fill the cup and place it al kaf paro. So you know, if you could see me here, let me step back an inch, that the cup is, of course, held in the right hand if you're a righty. And traditionally, it's held like this, holding it on your palm, because that's the way the Torah describes al kaf paro, on Pharaoh's hand, his outstretched hand, that when we recite Kiddush, or when you take a KOS SHEL BERACHAH, this is the proper manner in which to hold it, and or to encircle it with your fingers, perhaps for Kabbalistic reasons, around the bottom, and to hold it in this manner, and not to kind of hold it this way, or the way that you would hold a mug, or etc. Now, of course, if one does hold the cup, in this kind of more conventional way, and not from the bottom, you certainly fulfill the obligations. But the widespread custom is to do it this way, holding it from the bottom, based upon the pasuk in the story of Yosef and the Sarah Mashkim. Sometimes if a person has a little bit of a shaky hand, particularly as we'll see that one of the obligations of a KOS SHEL BERACHAH is to fill it to the tippy top. If you have a bit of a shaky hand, particularly as you get a little bit older, this can be difficult. It can be embarrassing, God forbid. And of course, if there's any other reason necessary, you could hold it in any kind of stable manner necessary. So Yair asks, should you hold it that way when saying the bracha or also while drinking from it? No, I think it's presumably while reciting the bracha, and then you can hold it in whichever comfortable manner is necessary while drinking from it. There's an interesting question, of course, about hidur mitzvah, which we've talked about in the past. It seems that for a very long time, and I assume this was not always the case, that our Kiddush cups are made out of metal, silver, or silver-plated. There's no requirement that they be made out of metal, out of precious metal, or out of any other metal, but that they should be respectable looking, and that, again, all things being equal, our general principle is that if within reason, within limit, and within one's budget, one should endeavor to make Kiddush over a more beautiful beauty, aesthetics being something in the eye of the beholder, more beautiful Kiddush cup over a less beautiful Kiddush cup. But if one has a ceramic Kiddush cup that he prefers, these are matters of aesthetics which should be dictated by one's own taste. We have in our collection, we have a wooden Kiddush cup, a very lovely painted wood by an Israeli artist. Wood, metal, ceramic, glass. There's no reason to prefer one over the other. Although, again, conventionally, this is what your average Kiddush cup is going to look like. However, what about disposable? Very often, you go to the Kiddush. You go to a Kiddush someplace, sometimes in shul. The shul, of course, has a proper Kiddush cup, but not always. And what about saying Kiddush over on a disposable, on a plastic cup? So there's a very well-known tshuva from Rav Moshe Feinstein here in the Igrot Moshe from 1968, in which he says, "Hine, b'dvar kos lekiddush im rishayin lasot al kos." Shnasa miniyar shehu kli rak lisha sheshama asher asarti. So he's writing to his respondent, this Reb Aryeh Leib Bobbins. I don't know who that was. He says that in the letter that he received, that his shoel, the person asking the question, said that he had heard that Rav Moshe had said it was forbidden to make Kiddush over on a paper cup. Emet hadavar, daha hatosfot mifarshim bevrachot modim v'chein v'shabbat kadvu b'shem b'nei narvona shene'emar behadvarim hatzvichim b'kos shel beracha hu sheyeh kos gufo kli shalem. So he points out that the Tosfot mentions that whenever one requires a KOS SHEL BERACHAH, a bracha cup, that it has to be a proper whole cup. I mean, in the medieval ages, they didn't have Dixie cups. They didn't have disposable cups, plastic cups, styrofoam, which has largely been gotten rid of. But what could they have been talking about? What kind of non-permanent cups might they have had? Gores. Tilale mentions gores. There were disposable cups. They just weren't made out of paper. They were fashioned out of all types of things. The skins of gourds. I understand in some parts of the world it was very popular this week to hollow out pumpkins and to do things with them. You can make them receptacles for all types of goodies and candies, and in theory, you could do the same for beverages. So even in the Middle Ages, even in antiquity, there was an idea of a non-permanent vessel. וכתב המגן אברהם, תאפילו נשבר רק בסיס, שלמטה נמי פסול, אף שגוף הכוס שלם. And the Magen Avram mentions the idea that the cup should be whole, and if it's cracked or broken, even just on the base, it should not be used. So this has to do with a sense of the aesthetic and the respect for the mitzvah, not merely if the integrity of the cup would be compromised. If you have a cup, let's say, that has a crack, I'm sure if you were to come here and visit my kitchen cabinet, you'd find all types of mugs or cups or things that are cracked or chipped or things like that. So if you want to use them to drink your coffee in the morning, that's up to you. But in terms of saying kiddush over it, that would be improper. Alma ba'inyan she'ei kos na'eh she'rak kos kazeh kasher le'birkat hamazon l'kiddush ro'eh ani she'kos shel niyar she'hu rak l'shah al pam zeh lavad hu od garua. So if it's not proper to make kiddush over a cup that's cracked, how much more so over a cup that you're going to drink from and then throw right into the garbage? De'ein lo shum chashivut shevaday eino re'ui lebirkat hamazon l'kiddush. Ach kesheleka kos acher ulai yesh lahakel. If you have no other choice, if you do bidi avad, one shouldn't do it. But if you have made kiddush over a paper disposable cup, yesh lahakel, you can be lenient in the absence of any other choice, but really it is not proper. One should not do that. Now the dinim of the KOS SHEL BERACHAH are organized very nicely in the Shmirat Shabbat Kehilchata. I just mentioned this over the course of our learning together. I want to make mention of important books that you should know and figures that you should know. The Shmirat Shabbat Kehilchata, 2 volumes, the essential work of Hilchot Shabbat, written by Rabbi Yehoshua Yeshayahu Newert, who passed away 2-3 years ago. It's a work of incredible importance. In our lifetime, it's hard to think of another halachic work that has achieved the kind of universal status as the Shmirat Shabbat Kehilchata, as a practical guide to Hilchot Shabbat. And in the Shmirat Shabbat, relevant to Kiddush, while talking about the other laws of Kiddush, he reviews the dinim of the KOS SHEL BERACHAH. So I want to use this as our text tonight as we look at these laws. Here again, he's talking about Kiddush, but all of these laws apply to any time one needs a KOS SHEL BERACHAH. He mentions this idea of the minhag in Yerushalayim was to take a cup that had 86 cc's, which is about 2.9 ounces. 86 being the gematria of KOS, according to the numerological principles by which each letter is assigned a value. Kaf is 20 and Vav is 6 and Samech is 60, so 20 plus 6 plus 60 equals 86 cc's. That is not the source of the size of the shiur, it's merely a mnemonic by which one can remember. Or he mentions another opinion of about 137 cc's, where he mentions the opinion of the Chazon Ish, which is 150 cc's, which works out to the gematria of KOS Hagun, a proper size cup. But our position, as I said earlier, is essentially that of Rav Moshe Feinstein, which is, for most purposes, 3.3 ounces. When should one endeavor to take the larger shiur for a KOS SHEL BERACHAH? Yes, but when we say the minhag Yerushalayim, we mean of the 20th century. But madvar mamrim b'kiddush shel laila v'chein b'havdalah. That Friday night kiddush and havdalah on Motzei Shabbat, there's reason to, since they're connected to, at least in principle, to Torah obligations, they Havdalah less so, but according to some opinions, Havdalah is also Torah obligation. So for those, one should endeavor for the largest size cup, but for all of the purposes, the smaller size is certainly acceptable. He then goes on to say, one should endeavor to have a beautiful cup, mishum hidur mitzvah, because of the general principle of of beautifying the mitzvot. And then he makes mention, of course, of the Juvenile Motion, which we just mentioned, that lechatchila one should not make Kiddush over a disposable cup, a chad pami cup, unless there's no other option. And then he mentions the im ein lo afilu kos kazeh, if one doesn't even have a I don't know, you imagine somebody making maybe here in the army, although the Rabbanut in the army is quite well organized, somebody in some kind of bad situation, you're stuck in a hospital someplace, let's say, well, not a hospital in Yerushalayim, where Shabbos can actually be quite, quite nice, despite whatever unpleasantness brought you to the hospital. But in Chutz La'aretz, if you're in a hospital someplace, if you're, I had a situation, one of our congregants here in the shul called me. They were away in Europe on a vacation I forget, not in a major Jewish community, somewhere maybe in, I forget, I don't know, somewhere in Eastern Europe, but not so much in the Jewish community, and they were in a hotel, and they had arranged with some kosher caterer that sent, ready-made Shabbat meals, and of course, something went wrong, so an hour before Shabbat, they're in this place with no proper food, so they scrounge together whatever they can scrounge together, and they had they wanted to know what to do about Kiddush if they had no supplies or things like that. But if you have nothing, you can imagine a scenario where you have just a bottle, like one of those little bottles of wine that you get to the Shalach Manos, but you don't even have a paper cup to make Kiddush on. Technically speaking, you can make Kiddush just holding the bottle of wine and then pour out from the bottle into a different cup. Yakpid shehakos tiyeh shlema. One should be careful that the cup be whole, not broken, not dented. V'lo shvura o pguma, not cracked or broken or dented. V'lo b'miktzat. It's important to mention, of course, that if you do have a cup that holds more than a shiur, but the nature of, the nature of these Kiddush cups is that they'll get knocked over and hit the floor from time to time, and particularly the metal ones, well, I guess the ceramic and glass ones, if they hit the floor, that's the end. But these metal ones, we have a variety of Kiddush cups that are dented and bent and things like that, and we always wonder, should we take them to the silversmith and get them fixed up, or should we wait till our kids are old and out of the house and we have to stop worrying about things being knocked over, and that'll be our little window of opportunity to get all these things fixed before the grandchildren, Bezrat Hashem, one day will come and start breaking things again. But if you have a cup that's been dented, the dent would affect the volume of the cup. So you could have a cup which, in principle, holds more than enough wine, but because of the nature of the dent, the volume has been affected, and it no longer does. So one should be careful that it's not broken or dented, even a little bit. V'gam lo tiyeh stuka, or cracked. V'lo b'sfal yonah, v'lo b'dafnoteha, not neither on the rim nor on the sides. V'gam basis hakos yesh shalem, and if it's a type of cup that has a leg or a base, that should, even though this is technically ancillary to the cup, nevertheless, it too should be whole and not broken. These are terms that by now you should know. Lechatchila and b'diavad, every student of halacha should have a grasp of these terms. Lechatchila, from the outset, the way that the halacha is ideally performed, and then b'diavad, ex post facto, when you're coming to evaluate the circumstances after the fact, have you or have you not fulfilled the mitzvah? So lechatchila, you should strive to have a nice, proper, whole Kiddush cup, unbroken, undented, uncracked, etc. B'diavad, if you didn't have it, you have fulfilled your obligation of Kiddush. You have not, however, fulfilled all of the laws of how the KOS SHEL BERACHAH should look. KOS SHEL KIDDUSH TU'NA HADACHA MIBIFNIM V'SHTIFA MIBECHUTZ. Whenever one takes a KOS SHEL BERACHAH, for Kiddush or otherwise, prior to its use, you should wash it inside and rinse it outside. The difference between shtifa and hadacha is not important, but you should wash the cup before Kiddush. When you come home from shul on Friday night, if the table is all set, which it should be, that's a different halacha, that the table should be set before Shabbat as a sign of kavod, of honoring the Shabbat, so that when you come home from shul, everything is ready to go. It's also practical. It's a practical consideration, particularly those that have small children, to minimize the crankiness. The more organized you are, sometimes the better things go. But you should take the cup and you should wash it out in the sink, dry it off, and use it. This is a sign of respect, not just because there's always the possibility that there's a little bit of gunk or residue left in from last week's Kiddush, but even if it appears clean, the halacha is that one should wash out the cup before using it for a KOS SHEL BERACHAH. This is not actually a widely known halacha, but it's one that people should be careful about. If the KOS is washed properly and put back in a cabinet, technically speaking, this halacha does not apply, but nevertheless, it is a praiseworthy feature to why do people don't wash the cup but add water to the bottom before putting in wine grape juice? I'm not sure that people don't wash the cup. There is this custom of putting a bit of water into the cup before, but I don't think that it's in place of washing the cup. I think the cup is washed after each use, as it should be, not just for respect for the cup, but also for hygiene. So it's always proper to wash and rinse the cup before its use. I'll get to the water in a second. Tetvav, lo yikadesh b'kos piguma. There's a term called kos piguma, a defective KOS. Now, this is not talking about a defect in the cup itself, but a defect in the wine. If one has a cup for Kiddush, and he takes a sip out of it, if somebody recites Kiddush on a cup and drinks from it, and leaves over 3/4 of the wine, it's not proper, it's not respectful to recite Kiddush again on a cup that's already been drunken out of. Tahainu kos sheshatak far mina, miyena, vafilu rak ta'amo mimenu ti'ima kolshu. Even if somebody just took a teensy little sip from it, it's not proper now to recite a bracha over this pre-drunken from cup. And even if they used a straw, yesh lahachmir v'gam im shatu yeshirot min habakbuk lo yimzog min hayayin shabo letoch hakos l'tzorech hakiddush. If somebody drank out of the bottle, you shouldn't use that wine directly for Kiddush. Ulam b'diavad im kidei shel hayayin v'nitbaer lo shaya pagum yetza. Again, this is a lechatchila halacha. It shouldn't be done this way. Ex post facto, if it was done this way, you are yotze, but it is improper. However, efshar letaken kos paguma. It is possible to fix a defective cup of wine if somebody else took a sip out of a cup of wine, and then you want to recite Kiddush over this cup of wine, it's possible to fix it up. Now, it's possible to fix it up, and there might be a need to do so because wine is expensive. I mean, today wine is thankfully not so expensive, but kosher wine really was expensive for a long time, and it was difficult to come by. So people would not want to waste a cup of wine. If you add a little bit of new wine or some other beverage, like a bit of water, min habakbuk lakos, af im yosif ma'at mayim mikos shel mayim shelo shatu mimenu, o afilu mayim min haberez, yesh b'zeh mishum tikun hakos. Ubilvad shehamayim lo yachlishu et hachozek hayayin yeter al midah. You don't want to water down the wine too much, but if somebody has taken a sip out of the cup, and now you want to use the 90% of whatever is left in the cup in order to make a new Kiddush, so you can fix the wine, not merely by, you can't pour, here, if this is a kos pagum, let's say it's 90% filled, somebody says Kiddush, takes a sip, and then there's all this wine that shouldn't go to waste. And I come home and I want to make Kiddush. I don't want to let all this wine go to waste. So what can I do? I can add fresh wine or even a bit of water to it, and that removes the, what do they call that? They used to call it, the cooties, that somebody else drank out of this, the backwash, whatever it was, by adding new wine to it. This is why some have this custom of putting a little bit of water into the cup for Kiddush, as Leah mentioned, because maybe the whole bakbuk, the whole bottle was pagum because somebody drank out of it. This may have been a real fear in the days when wine was held in a big barrel, and then you took from the barrel into a decanter or into a pitcher or into a flask to pour off at the table, because the barrel obviously couldn't be brought from the cellar to the table. But if someone had taken a shluck right out of the barrel, as they might have been tempted to do, the whole quantity of the barrel becomes pagum, or tainted in this way, not proper now to make Kiddush over this wine, unless you fix it by adding a little water or fresh wine to it. So this is why some people have this custom of adding a bit of water to the Kiddush cup, not because of the previous halacha we saw of washing out the Kiddush cup, but because of alleviating the potential of kos pagum, of the defective cup of wine. This is really more of a din about the wine itself than about the cup, but it's relevant to the cup for Kiddush and KOS SHEL BERACHAH. Hayayin shnishar b'kos shel Kiddush acharei sheshatu mimenu ki az kol hayayin shebabakbuk yeh pagum lekiddush elatchila Yosif ma'at yayin min habakbuk lakos v'rak achar kach yachzir et hayayin lakos. So what do you do if you're in a situation where you have to conserve your wine, where you pour the wine into the cup? Let's say your cup is a revi'it. Let's say you have 5 ounces of wine in your Kiddush cup. One is not required to drink the entire cup, although some opinions hold that that is praiseworthy, that you should drain your whole cup. But Kiddush must be recited over that volume of wine. And our custom is that the cup is filled to the tippy top, to the tippy. So, even some people are careful to fill it up so that you have, what is that, surface tension, right? So that the wine is literally
almost overflowing. Or some people make the wine overflow, a reference to the pasuk in Tehillim, kosi rivaya, that my cup overflows, to show a sign of plenty and blessing, that you have enough wine to even spill a drop. So you have 5 ounces of wine. You don't want to waste it. You drink a mole lugma. A cheekful is all that you really need to drink. Now you have, I don't know, 4.5 ounces of kos pagum. You don't want to waste this wine. It's too expensive. But you can't pour it back into the bottle, because that will render the entire bottle of wine pagum. And then you won't be able to use the rest of the bottle for Kiddush. So there are 2 solutions. One is to add some wine to the cup, to refill the cup again, which now saves it from being pagum, and then that whole cup can be returned to the bottle or the barrel. Kol hayayin min hakos lebakbuk. V'lochen harotze lekadesh al kos shechavero kfar kidesh aleha. If you want to say Kiddush over a cup that somebody else has already recited Kiddush from and drank from, Tov yaseh im yosif tchila ma'at yayin min habakbuk lekos, yachzir et kol hayayin lebakbuk, yimaleh et hakos mechadash. So I make Kiddush on this and I take a sip. Now you come home and you want to make Kiddush. You should take water. You should take water or wine from the bottle, fill the cup again, pour the entire contents back into the bottle, and then start from scratch. That's the kos pagum. I'm going to come back to this momentarily. Mitzvah lekadesh al kos malay. It's proper to make Kiddush over an entirely full glass. Gam im hayam echila kama reviot. Even if your Kiddush cup is very, very large, you could have a Kiddush cup that is exactly the shear, exactly 3.3 ounces. Or you could have a Kiddush cup that's 20 ounces, one of these big Rebbe cups. It doesn't matter. Even though your 20-ounce cup holds 6, 7 revi'iyot in it, it has to be full, because the fullness is a sign of plenty and blessing. Ve'im ein lo ela kos gdola, ve'ein lo de yayin kedei lemaloto, mutar lekadesh aleha gam im einam le'ah, im amnam yesh ba lefachot revi'it yayin. But again, bidi avad, not the way you should do it, but a way to do it. You have only one Kiddush cup. You have one proper Kiddush cup, but it's very large. You have 5 ounces of wine, which is more than enough for the volume of wine you need, but the only cup you have holds 10 ounces. The cup is only going to be half full. You're going to be lacking the ideal requirement of having the cup to be full, but you do in fact have more than the minimum volume of wine that you need. B'di avad, if there's no other choice, you can say Kiddush or make a kos shel beracha that way, although it is not preferred. He mentions this idea that it's, again, this is more of a halacha about the wine than about the cup, that generally speaking, the halacha prefers red wine over white, but that is only all things being equal. If you have very cheap red wine and very expensive white wine, you should prefer the better wine. If you prefer white wine and have a distaste for red wine, you should use the white wine. But all things being equal, red wine is preferred. That is the opinion of the Ramban. That all things being equal, red wine is preferred. There is this interesting phenomena of a certain style of cup that arose in Eastern Europe in the 16th century. Let me show you a picture of it. Shabbos. And this is a topic which is discussed in these volumes, the Minhagei Yisrael, by Rabbi Professor Daniel Sperber from Bar Ilan University. 8 volumes about a variety of customs. And in his book, he mentions, and he has these kinds of photographs of these Kiddush Cups that have these covers on them. He brings a variety of illustrations from, sometimes woodcuts and machzorim. Here's an illustration from I guess like a bencher from 1692 with the Birkat Hamazon that has this woodcut in it, and you can see the people reciting the Birkat Hamazon. The man reciting the Birkat Hamazon while holding a cup, and the cup has this kind of lid on it, this kind of cover. And in the museum, in the Israel Museum, this is the Jewish Museum in New York. Here's a Kiddush Cup from 1803 with the cover. And here's a Kiddush Cup from Germany, 1860, that's in the collection of the Israel Museum with this decorative cover, with this lid. Here's a more fanciful one in the 16th century in the Jewish Museum in Berlin. It looks, if you see it, I would have thought this was a box for an etrog, wouldn't you? But it's not. You can't see it here, but I can draw for you how this, you can see it here. It's a black and white photo. So you can see what it looks like with the lid off. Oops. There. Here, you can see here what it looks like with the lid off. But when the lid is on, you can't see that there's a seam here. That the lid lifts off and it covers it in a way that it looks like it's one whole grape cluster. I think that the museum calls this the pineapple Kiddush Cup, although it may be just some kind of abstract decoration. I doubt that it's modeled on a pineapple, or it may be to look like a cluster of grapes. Now, this idea arises suddenly in the 16th century in Germany and in Eastern Europe, and it's curious where the idea comes from. The Shulchan Aruch says, and again, there was always this concern about access to wine, to kosher wine, and this is why the custom developed to make Kiddush over schnapps, which was readily available, or even beer in the morning, or Friday night, in the absence of wine, to recite Kiddush over the challah. In the absence of wine, Friday night, you can wash your hands for Netilat Yadayim, and then recite Kiddush instead of holding a cup of wine over the 2 challah loaves, and substituting Hamotzi Lechem min haaretz for the Borei Pri Hagafen that would have been recited, and you could make Kiddush over the challah. Very rare to see this. I don't know if I've ever seen it. If I've ever been present when this was done, perhaps some of you have. Let me know if you've ever witnessed this. But technically speaking, these are the substitutes for wine. So, im ein lo ela kos echad. If you only have 1 cup of wine, what should you do? Makadesh bo balayla ve'eno to'em mimenu. You should say Kiddush over the cup of wine. Kiddush is fulfilled through the recitation of the text. The prop is holding the cup of wine as you're saying it, but you know that not everyone needs to drink from the cup. You don't like wine. If you're a guest in someone's home, and someone else is reciting the Kiddush, it's customary that we pour off and pass around little cups of wine for everyone to have. Or we give everybody a Kiddush cup and let them fill it up as much as they want. But technically speaking, you need not drink from the Kiddush of the person who fulfilled the obligation by reciting the Kiddush for you. So if you only have 1 cup of wine for the whole Shabbat, you should recite Kiddush on Friday night, but not taste from it. Because if you taste from the cup of wine, it becomes pagum. Ela shofech mimenu lekos acher v'to'em yayin shel kiddush me'akos hasheni. You recite Kiddush on this cup. You pour off a bit into another cup, and you drink it from there. So that the wine that remains in the cup over which you recited Kiddush is not pagum, it is not defective, and can be used for subsequent brachot. Machar, Shabbos morning, mekadesh b'ma shenishar b'kos rishon. You make Kiddush over the 90% of the wine that's left in the cup. And even though the cup is no longer filled to the tippy top, we saw that the requirement to be filled to the tippy top is only an ideal. But b'di'eved, you can manage without it. Ve'im lo hayabo ela revi'it b'tzimtzum. But if the original cup only had exactly a revi'it, so that when you drink from it a little bit on Friday night, what you're left with for Shabbat morning is less than the minimum volume. V'nechsar mimenu b'layla, some was taken off at night. Mozgola machar lahashlimo l'revi'it. You should fill it up a little more so that you have a revi'it. If you don't have any more wine to fill it up with, you can add a little bit of water if it's still the overwhelming majority of it is wine. V'hainu dafka k'sheyesh lo kos acher lahavdalah. That's if you have another cup to say havdalah on at the end of Shabbat. She'im lo kain mutav she'enechenu lahavdalah she'i efshar b'pat. Havdalah has to be recited over a cup of wine. Havdalah, you can't substitute bread at night or liquor during the morning. And therefore, Havdalah, you should save the cup for Havdalah. Mishi yikadesh alav v'lo yeh lo yayin lahavdalah. V'im yesh lo shnei kosot mitzumtzamim achar miziga yikadesh b'layla be'echad v'yavdil al hasheni. V'lo yikadesh b'yom v'kiddush b'layla adif. If you have no choice, so then Kiddush at night takes precedence. So this idea of using 1 cup to cover more than one base, 1 cup, you pour off a little bit, you drink it Friday night, the majority of the cup that's left, you save for the next day, you can see where this is going, becomes not only a solution to a problem, but it becomes an ideal. The Magen Avram, who was an important commentary on the Shulchan Aruch, he lived in the decades following the Shulchan Aruch. He lives in the 17th century. So he mentions this idea: Tov lekadesh al kos gadol sheyishe'er mioto kos lekiddush hayom ulahavdalah. He has this idea that you start off with 1 really big cup. You recite Kiddush over that cup, you pour off from it, Friday night you drink. But then you leave over this very large cup, and you make Kiddush Shabbos morning over it. You pour off from it, and you drink. Whether you're able to fill it back up to the tippy-toppy or not. If you are able to fill it back up to the tippy-toppy, that's preferable. And then you use it a 3rd time for Havdalah. But if you have this 1 big cup laying around, which you're using for 3 times at bat, Kiddush on Friday night, Kiddush on Shabbos morning, and then again at Havdalah, the Gemara in Masechet Pesachim says, Omer b'Yochanan shlosha minochlei olam haba. There are 3 types of people that are guaranteed to inherit the world to come. Someone who lives in Eretz Yisrael. Well, of course, we know that that's a very good thing to do. V'hamagadel banav l'talmud Torah, and somebody who raises his children to study Torah. Also a very good thing to do. V'hamavdil al hayayin b'motzei Shabbatot, and a person that recites Havdalah on Motzei Shabbat over wine? Maihi, what does that mean? He makes Havdalah on wine on Saturday night. Everybody makes wine on Havdalah on Saturday night. Mishayer mikidusha la Havdalta. That the Gemara says it's a special bracha to do it the way that the Magen Avram 1,100 years later suggests. You have one big cup and you leave over wine. You intentionally have leftovers from the Kiddush that are used for the wine, for the Havdalah. But there's a problem. The Shulchan Aruch says, mashkin shenitgalu, beverages that are left out uncovered, asurim chachamim dachashinan shema shatan nachash mehem v'til behem eres. Chazal had a variety of cautionary fears. Chamira sakanta mi'isura, things that they were worried posed health risks. Some of them were relevant in their day but are no longer relevant today. Some of them appear to be, it's not clear to us why they were dangerous. One of these things is this idea of eating fish and meat together, which, many people still have this cautionary practice not to eat fish and meat together. Although it's not also like eating milk and meat together. That's a Jewish custom not to eat fish and meat together. But if beverages were left out uncovered, what do you mean left out? There was no refrigerator, but instead of being closed up in a bottle or in a cask, if they were just left out, you had a cup of wine that got left out on the table, on the counter, you shouldn't drink from it, because there's a fear that a snake came along and the snake put some poison into the beverage and you will drink the poison. The Shulchan Aruch says, "V'achshav she'ein nechashim mitzuyim beineinu mutar." Nowadays, that there aren't so many snakes running around drinking out of our wine, we needn't be worried about this. But later, that's the halacha about food. That's not a halacha about Shabbat. That's not a halacha about KOS SHEL BERACHAH. But later, again, I'm sorry, a typo. That should be an ayin. Shulchan Aruch. Hold on. Yeah, so Peter mentions that's what the Shulchan Aruch was afraid of about fish and meat, that it posed a health danger, whether it was tzarat, leprosy, or tzarat, some other disease, or something else altogether, but it was a health disease. But this is not, it's not clear to us, like, what the health risk of fish and meat together is. It's true, there's also custom amongst certain communities of Sephardic Jews not to eat fish and dairy together. So the Shulchan Aruch says, when it comes in terms of choosing a wine for Kiddush, one should not make Kiddush over wine yain miguleh afilu ha'idna delok pida gilui. So even though when it comes in general, one shouldn't drink beverages that were left out. On Wednesday night, you had a cup of Coca-Cola you left out on the kitchen table. You had a mug of coffee you were drinking before you finished your work for the evening. And you come back in the morning and the cup of coffee is still there. You shouldn't drink it because maybe on Wednesday evening the snake came and put poison. But the Shulchan Aruch says you don't have to worry about that, because nowadays there's no snakes putting poison in your coffee cup on Wednesday evenings. But when it comes time for the halachot of the wine for the Kiddush, he says, even though nowadays we're not stringent about this matter of not drinking uncovered beverages, for Kiddush, one should not select wine that was left out uncovered. This may, in fact, be the source of these halachot that arise in Germany and Eastern Europe, starting in the the source of these Kiddush Cups that arise in Germany and Eastern Europe in the 16th century, precisely at a time when kosher wine becomes difficult, less affordable, less easily transported,
to places. And a Jew would have a Kiddush Cup. This is a very large Kiddush Cup. This Kiddush Cup probably holds at least 3 Revi'iyot. You could make Kiddush Friday night, Kiddush Shabbos morning, and Havdalah from the wine in this Kiddush Cup. But the problem is, you can't leave a Kiddush Cup laying around, because then it becomes Yayin Miguleh, uncovered wine. And that's why we see the arisal of this custom of making Kiddush Cups with a built-in cover. This was the equivalent of 16th century Judaica Tupperware. What's the point of Tupperware? That you can have this serving dish with food in it, and then it comes with a lid built on that snaps right on, and you can put it right into the refrigerator. You don't have to transfer it into something else. This is the invention of Jewish Tupperware. Of course, we made it look fancy and expensive, but that's the way Jews are. You know, like Chinese food. Chinese food in the non-kosher world is cheap food that you eat out of a paper carton, and only Jews figured out the way to make this expensive. But you know, that's the Yiddish cup for us. And here's the Yiddish cup. I've made a pun there. If you don't get the pun, try to figure out what I did. This is a real Yiddish cup, because it's a cup, a Kiddush cup, a KOS SHEL BERACHAH, which is designed to circumvent a variety of halachic problems. And that's why we saw the advent of this fashion in different places at a certain time. Nowadays, I don't know, has anybody ever seen Kiddush Cups on the market this way? I mean, in antique stores maybe, but I don't recall ever going into a Judaica store and seeing Kiddush Cups that have these designs. But I'm going to tell somebody, the next person that's looking to buy me a nice birthday present or something, I'd like a Kiddush Cup with one of these things. It's interesting, and it plays into this larger theme of the history of halachic objects and how they got that way. So this has been a quick overview of some of the things related to the KOS Shel Berachah, and we will find something else interesting to discuss next week. Thanks very much.